Restoration of capitalism in Germany. 1. Stalin immediately surrenders the larger and better developed part of Germany to Allies. The Allies of the USSR took up the fate of Germany as early as August 1941, while the USSR was the main country that fought against Germany. Wikipedia writes, the Allies in the anti-Hitler coalition turned to discussing the post-war world and the fate of Germany in 1941, when the Atlantic Charter was drawn up on board the cruiser, which was stationed in Argentia Bay off the coast of Newfoundland. Promulgated by US President Franklin Roosevelt on behalf of himself and on behalf of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill on August 14th of the same year. At a conference in Tehran at the end of 1943, Stalin came to an agreement with his allies regarding the fate of post-war Germany. That is, it was decided in principle to divide Germany into zones of occupation and therefore influence of the main states that were fighting against Germany. The final decision regarding the fate of Germany in the sense of its division was made at the Yalta Conference. Wikipedia writes, at a conference in Yalta from February 4th to February 11th, 1945, the Allies agreed to establish new borders in Europe and confirmed the division of Germany into zones of occupation, additionally highlighting the French zone at the expense of the British and American ones. The introduction of France into the equation of forces operating in Germany meant that the USSR was assigned 1/4 of the influence in Germany. Alexander Watlin, in the book Germany in 20th Century, writes, at the Yalta Conference, Stalin gave the most industrial part of Germany to the Western Allies. On these territories, there was 62% of industrial production, 82% of coal mining, 90% of steel smelting. It can be supposed that the landing in Normandy, France, in the summer of 1944 by the United States and England, the so-called Second Front, was done mainly in order to prevent Soviet troops from seizing Germany entirely. Anglo-American troops reached the western border of Germany only in February of 1945. On the other hand, the Soviet troops, as a result of the Vistula Oder operation, crossed the Oder on the ice at the end of January 1945. Berlin was about 70 kilometers away. However, they stopped here, waiting for other parts of the army to pull up. So, the first question is, why did Stalin give most of Germany to the Allies? The answer lies in his plans for the fate of Germany after the victory. namely that a socialist revolution was not to take place in Germany. In his opinion, it was supposed to become a democratic country friendly to the USSR. The refusal of the Stalinist leadership to use the war to spread socialism to other countries, its refusal of the socialist revolution in general in other countries, was in fact a continuation of its policy within the USSR. Suffice it to recall the struggle of Stalinism against the theory of permanent revolution. As an alternative, the theory of building socialism in a single country was proposed. The fact that the Stalinist regime did not want to spread the socialist revolution in other countries was proved by its policy in Spain in 1936, in Yugoslavia in 1943. See Milovan Djurdjić's Conversations with Stalin. Also see our article about Greece called Thermidor in the Greek Revolution. Here Stalinists also played a formidable role, and other countries. The restoration of capitalism in Germany began with Stalin's refusal to spread socialist revolution to other countries. West Germany, after 1945, essentially restored the Nazi leadership to power at state apparatus, on the pretext that there were not enough educated cadres ready to take over the country. The program of denazification of the country, carried out by the Allies, was deceitful and corrupt. In the state apparatus, for the most part, the same personnel worked as under Hitler. For example, Chancellor Adenauer hosted a Nazi General Manstein in 1953. I'm talking about this guy, Erich von Manstein. Please note that he was a military advisor to West Germany from 1949 to 1956. What makes this problem relevant is that Russia today is trying to achieve a non-bloc status in relation to Ukraine, just as the USSR under Stalin tried to achieve a non-bloc status of Germany. As in the case of Germany, this position, neither yours nor ours, is doomed to fail in a world where everything takes a certain geopolitical position, especially after Russia attacked Ukraine. NATO seeks to destroy the USSR piece by piece, and the leadership of the USSR, represented by the Stalinists and their followers, parties such as the United Russia, this is the ruling party in Russia, or Servants of the People, this is currently the ruling party in Ukraine. These parties do not seek to destroy capitalism. On the contrary, they seek to join the civilized nations. Thus, when one side attacks and the other only defends, the outcome of the struggle is predetermined. The correct policy in time of war should be to use the difficulties experienced by the capitalist states in connection with the war to organize socialist revolutions in these countries. For example, in countries like the United States, racial issues come to the fore, as the Black Lives Matter movement has shown. But the Russian leadership does not seek to use this revolutionary dynamite, in the words of Malcolm X, which is placed under the very structure of capitalism in the United States. 2. On the verge of a new world war. We should have prefaced this article with a statement about our party position, because each material comes out from a party position, which in many respects predetermines the paths of research and final conclusions. My party position is the point of view of the world socialist revolution as a desirable outcome from the current world crisis. That is essentially the point of view of Lev Trotsky. The situation today is reminiscent of what it was in the 1930s, when a new world war was approaching the world. What should we do today? I reread some of Lev Trotsky's articles in the Bulletin of Opposition written before the World War. This is a Bulletin Оппозиции or Bulletin of the Opposition. It can be found on trotskyiana.net at this address, or in the Russian language, Bulletin Оппозиции can be found at iskra-research.org. Trotsky has evaluated three main classes in society: the big bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie, or the middle class, and the proletariat. The last class he assesses as basically revolutionary, but today it has ceased to be such. This is due to the transition of world production to automation, informatization, and robotization of production. And the leading role in this does not belong to the proletariat. The leading cadres are those brilliant personalities who manage to combine the knowledge and experience from several industries, such as Sergei Korolev, who, in addition to being an excellent designer of aircraft and missiles, was also an excellent organizer. I think that a person from any class can be a revolutionary insofar as he or she overcomes the narrow limits of his or her class. For example, in Jack London's Martin Eden, we see a young man who was able to rise above the workers of his time through intense self-education, a desire to become a writer, which kindled in him a love for a girl from the upper classes of the American society. An analogous idea shines through in the novel The Sea Wolf, where we can see an educated young man, a writer, who, by the will of fate, becomes a dishwasher on a ship with a ferocious captain. But thanks to his ability to learn from life, he was able to rise above his circumstances. In the article, Before a New World War, from the Bulletin of the Opposition, numbers 58 through 59, from September-October 1937, Trotsky writes, left to its own logic, a world war, under the current conditions of technology, would mean for mankind a complex and costly method of suicide. How true these words are today. We, as a human race, are on the verge of a disaster, mass suicide, which is a new world war in which atomic weapons are already being used. For example, depleted uranium shells in Yugoslavia in 1999, in Iraq in 2003, in Ukraine in 2022 through 2023. That is the current date. The war is still going on. That is why there are all sorts of reports about flying saucers and other miracles. For example, this one. Mysterious UFO allegedly spotted in photo captured during a family beach stroll. Because part of humanity hopes that someone out of this world will come and save the human race. A new world war means a new series of revolutions. Lev Trotsky writes, in the months of impending military danger, as in the first period of the war, the masses are seized with the force of a natural reflex by state centripetal patriotic tendencies. However, the further course of operations, with its retinue of impoverishment, savagery, and despair, will not only revive, but also bring to an extreme development all frictions, antagonisms, and centrifugal tendencies, which sooner or later will find their expression in uprisings and revolutions. In the war of Russia against Ukraine, started in 2022, we see that while at the beginning of the war almost all Ukrainians united for the sake of protecting their country, in the course of the war, when corruption and the thief nature of the regime comes out more and more clearly, the people more and more decisively begin to fight for their rights. For example, look at messages in the Telegram channel Left Among the People. Let's take a look at this. So this is called Left Among the People, or in Russian, Левые в народе. And we can scroll to the bottom to see what are the messages here. For example, the last one is about the idea that Ukrainians stopped believing the official mass media. The most trustworthy they find Telegram. For example, here you see YouTube. Facebook is very low. And then radio and various printed mass media have only 2% trust. This clip shows how a Ukrainian police are trying to arrest a new driver for the German tanks. This message is about the idea that one army officer responsible for new recruits to the army was found dead. Probably somebody smashed his head. If the next world war starts where the previous one ended, the atomic bombings, then what will be left of humanity, of the planet? Let's say there is something left, but then there will be a swift reaction to the war and to the ruling class or ruling caste in every country. We, the people of the planet Earth, must prepare for a new world war and revolution. 3. Swaying from side to side leads to the capture of the German Democratic Republic by the capitalists. The GDR was not an independent state, but a satellite of the USSR. Just like other so-called socialist countries, where so-called socialism was established at the will of the USSR. For example, in Mongolia in 1921. See our article, Mongolia, the 16th Republic of the USSR, at this address, tommyjoe2017.wordpress.com /Mongolia-16-Respublika-SSSR- this address. The ruling party of the GDR, the SED, that is the United Socialist Party of Germany, was in fact a fragment from the CPSU, that is the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. What the leadership in the Kremlin wanted was what the leadership of the GDR did. In the article, GDR Building Socialism in the Age of Ulbricht, 1945 to 1971, we read, Ulbricht said, everything should look democratic, but everything should be under our control. But since the majority of the votes still belong to the Social Democrats, the SVAG decided to unite them with the Communists into a single socialist party. The SVAG was the Soviet military administration in Germany. Despite the resistance of the Social Democrats, the Joint Congress of the SPD and the KPD in Berlin, that is the Social Democrats and the Communist Party in Berlin, on April 21st, 22nd, 1946, proclaimed the unification 600,000 communists and 680,000 social democrats. The SED, although it became the most massive and leading party in Germany, did not receive recognition from the people as a real German party, because its pro-Soviet orientation was too obvious. And on this photograph, we can see the leader of the Communist Party of Germany, Wilhelm Pieck. He shakes hands with the leader of the German Social Democratic Party in the Soviet zone of occupation, Otto Grotewohl, at the Unification Congress of the SED, which was April 21st, 1946. Stalin, before the emergence of the Federal Republic of Germany, which was in 1949, led a course towards the unification of the Soviet zone of occupation and the Anglo-American zones. During this period, socialist undertakings in the Soviet zone of occupation were suppressed. The German communists who returned from the USSR found the policy of the German communists who had come out of the underground to be too leftist. When the FRG was formed, its own currency was introduced, its army was organized, state machine was formed. Stalin was forced to mirror the move with the formation of the GDR. It was then that the go-ahead was given for building of socialism in the GDR. After the death of Stalin, Beria, this guy, Lavrenti Beria, summoned Walter Ulbricht, this guy, and other leaders of the GDR to the Kremlin, where Beria forbade building of socialism in the GDR. The New Deal course was taken. In the article, GDR Building Socialism in the GDR in the Age of Ulbricht, 1945-1971. Actually, the article is in Russian at this address. We read, after Stalin's death, a program was drawn up for the leaders of the SED to improve the situation in the GDR, implying an end to the persecution of the church, the dissolution of agricultural cooperatives, the development of the production of consumer goods, rehabilitation of the private sector in the economy. Its leaders were blamed for the instability of the economic course of the GDR. This is important. If you remember that in 1953 there were riots in the GDR. The USSR, for its part, reduced the volume of the remaining reparations to 50%. The government of the GDR took a number of measures. Students who were expelled on religious grounds were returned. Loans were allocated for the production of consumer goods. Communication with West Germany was improved. Then Beria was removed and shot in the USSR. I recommend the book by Pavel Sudoplatov. This guy. It is called Intelligence and the Kremlin. Actually, it is written in Russian. Разведка и Кремль. After Beria was removed from power in the USSR, in the GDR they again set a course for the construction of socialism. It is worth noting, however, that the GDR began to lag behind its Western counterpart in such advanced areas as the production of cars, computers, and so on. For example, in this photo, On the left we can see an East German Trabant, and here on the right we can see a West German Mercedes. They are approximately from the same year of production. The leadership of the GDR preferred to copy existing models from leading Western firms instead of creating their own. So between the release of products in the West and the appearance of a similar product in the GDR, it took from 5 to 10 years, when they were already morally obsolete. For example, in the first photo, we see a small supercomputer from the Robotron company, which was released in 1985. The name of the computer is Robotron K1840. It was copied from a similar DEC VAX 11/780 system from Digital Equipment Corporation, released in 1977 and discontinued in 1988. In 1964, as a result of a coup d'etat, Brezhnev came to power in the USSR. And in 1971, Ulbricht was removed in favor of the more conservative Erich Honecker. He is more in line with Brezhnev's political course. He also loves medals, just like Brezhnev. When Gorbachev comes to power in the USSR with his program of perestroika, which turns out to be the restoration of capitalism, Honecker is left without support from the leadership of the USSR. The entire state and society of the GDR is left at the mercy of the West German capital. Thus, zigzags in the policy of the leadership of the USSR lead to the collapse of building socialism in the GDR, leveling the victory of the USSR in the Great Patriotic War in Germany. The results of the so-called unification of Germany, and in fact the colonization, occupation of East Germany, were disappearance of the right to work and housing, which was spelled out in the constitution of the GDR. West German firms buy up Eastern enterprises for 1 mark. That is, they simply take away, expropriate these enterprises. Many factories in the GDR were bought only to stop production and stop competition. Thus, for example, the factory for the production of cameras Pentacon stopped its work, even though the cameras Pentacon were quite good. Here on this picture you can see a dilapidated East German factory. According to this source, Behind the Wall, 75% of East Germans lost or changed jobs during the unification. Unemployment in the East is over 20%. In the west of Germany, the figure is 2 times less. There is a decline in production in the East, the closure of many enterprises. We also see a 40% decline in the birth rate in the East, according to this source. Population of East Germany is reduced by 15 to 30%. Almost all managers in the country are from the Western Germany. Managers from the East constitute only 1.7%. We see the arrogant attitude of West Germans towards East Germans. 80% of Aussies feel like second-class citizens. There is a decline in public transport. For example, railway tracks are overgrown with grass, railway stations are closed, and the only way to get to the local center is by car, according to this source. Compensation is carried out to the former owners, that is, capitalists, whose enterprises were nationalized by the GDR. There are evictions from houses, fragmentation of the lands of cooperatives. There is a reverse emancipation of women. Up to 40% of women who worked in the GDR had to return to the kitchen, that is, became unemployed. As a result of decline and extinction, East German society is radicalizing, that is, becoming more far-right and more left-wing. This is expressed, on the one hand, in the high support of the right-wing Alternative for Germany party in the East, and on the other hand, in the strongest support of the Die Linke, the left party in the East. Probably the civil war in Germany will begin in the East. Germany has not yet digested these lands. 4. A Stalinist state as a pattern. In the Bulletin of the Opposition, number 79 through 80, August through October 1939, in the article The USSR in War, Lev Trotsky writes, "It is not the general laws of the transition of modern society from capitalism to socialism that find expression in the bureaucratic degeneration of the Soviet state, but a special, exceptional, and temporary refraction of these laws in the conditions of the backwardness of the revolutionary country and the capitalist environment. The lack of consumer goods and the general struggle for their possession gives rise to the gendarme, who assumes the functions of distribution. Hostile pressure from outside places on the gendarme the role of protector of the country, gives him national authority, and allows him to plunder the country twice. In the light of world history after the Second World War, this statement seems to be incorrect. It is the bureaucratic degeneration of the initially revolutionary state aimed at socialism that seems to be a regularity. In all states that took the path of socialist revolution and in which a revolutionary organization was able to seize power, for example, in Yugoslavia after 1943, this is a Yugoslav partisan yelling "Death to fascism" before his hanging, and this is Tito, a Stalinist leader of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. Also, in the case of revolution in Albania, this is an Albanian mural, and more about Albanian revolution and Thermidor. You can read in our article entitled Reasons for Thermidor in the Albanian Revolution. Also, in the revolution in China, this photo shows People's Liberation Army entering Chengdu on December 27, 1949. In the Korean War, in the revolution on Cuba, in Cuba, this is Fidel Castro and his men in the Sierra Maestra. And finally, in the case of the revolution and war in Vietnam, in all of these cases, we are witnessing a bureaucratic degeneration of the state and society. We observe the same pattern in an even stronger version if the revolution was introduced into society on the bayonets of the Red Army, as it was in the case of GDR, that is Germany, in Poland, in Hungary, in Romania, and in Bulgaria in 1945. The African revolutions that broke out in the Portuguese colonies in 1975 show the same pattern: the rollback and restoration of capitalism. The events in Afghanistan in 1978, with their revolution and then the civil war, in which the Brezhnev regime intervenes in 1979, are presented as a synthesis of those revolutions that occurred independently with those where the revolution was brought into the country on the bayonets of the Soviet army. Here, the reaction has become perhaps the most acute. The fall of the regime that was previously supported by the USSR, real restoration of capitalism, and even individual elements of feudalism, represented by the rule of the Taliban, followed by the American occupation and civil war against the colonial government. All of these countries appear to be poor, backward, or semi-industrialized, such as Eastern Germany on one side of the industrial scale and Afghanistan on the other. It is interesting that in the course of the restoration of capitalism in all of these countries, the material conditions of the vast majority of the population worsens, leading to the fact that the population hates the democracy brought by the West. As a natural trend, we see the revival of nationalism and Nazism in these countries. This is the ideology of the bureaucracy, which strives to become a class of capitalists to seize material wealth that is the property of the state, and therefore the people who created it. The imperialists seek to intervene in these processes, either directly, as we see in Afghanistan, or indirectly, as we see in the course of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Russia, posing as a former successor to the USSR, and China, along with it, are the main enemies of imperialism. Masses of the population are trying to go to the West, where salaries are several times higher. Cities and villages are being abandoned. During the war between Russia and Ukraine, this happened on a massive scale. When millions of people left Ukraine, most of them women with children. Few people want to participate in the massacre, which is staged on the territory of Ukraine by cliques of bureaucracy in power in Ukraine and Russia and the imperialists in the West. People who live a peaceful life are hostages in the hands of the world bandits. The birth rate drops sharply and the death rate rises sharply. This appears to us as the extinction of the society. The world is teetering on the brink of a new world war, which, however, NATO is afraid to unleash. And this is for two reasons. One, atomic weapons in the hands of Russia and China. And two, during the previous world wars, socialist revolutions took place, which reduced the planetary reach of capitalism. In other words, the October Revolution was repeated in new ways again and again, and with it, the formation of a bureaucratic Stalinist caste that takes over the reins of government. Undoubtedly, contradictions intensify in the course of wars, especially civil wars. And this is true both for the Stalinist post-Soviet republics and for the countries of imperialism. For example, military units rebel against their commanders whom they do not see on the front lines. Prigozhin staged a march on Moscow in struggle against bureaucracy in the Russian military department, for which he was later successfully eliminated. The civil war in the former USSR has already begun. Now it is a matter of time when it will spread to each of the republics. Civil war in Russia and Ukraine, as well as in other former republics of the USSR, that's the immediate future. NATO can be expected to intervene as it has done in the early days of Soviet Russia and in Afghanistan in 2001. We all remember how Allied intervention ended in the early days of Soviet Russia, and most interestingly, how the Americans and their henchmen flew out of Afghanistan in 2021. Some of the Afghans died by falling off the planes taking off, while ordinary American soldiers transported their dogs in passenger seats. I do not think that the new intervention in Russia and China will end for imperialism relatively painlessly, as happened with their flight from Afghanistan. Russia and China are not comparable in their development to Afghanistan. This retreat will have revolutionary consequences for the whole world. 5. Stalinism and socialism. The history of the GDR in relation to the FRG is a sign of the collapse of Stalinism before the most advanced capitalism. Stalinism will lose in the struggle against the most advanced capitalism even today. This refers to the war between Ukraine and Russia. World imperialism stands behind Ukraine, while China secretly stands behind Russia, and even more weakly behind Russia we find other BRICS countries, primarily India. But this does not mean the final victory of capitalism over socialism, for Stalinism is the first stage in the formation of socialism, the first version of the future society. The world socialist revolution will be revived in the course of a new world war. Our task is to review what has been achieved so far in countries that have embarked on the path of socialism in order to avoid the mistakes that they have made. Most critics identify socialism and Stalinism, and therefore criticizing Stalinism, they reject socialism. It is necessary to clearly define the different nature of these concepts. Stalinism is the power of the nomenklatura. Socialism is the revolutionary democracy, both in the core of the Revolutionary Party and in the lower structures, such as in the Soviets. Stalinism is an era of primary industrialization catching up with the West, as we saw in the example of the GDR. Socialism is the mode of production based on the global computer network and robotics. Stalinism is the production relations copied from capitalism, namely the payment of workers according to the quantity of goods produced. Socialism is creativity at the place of production, a creative attitude towards one's own activity. And here, money are by no means the main motivating factor. Socialism is children's creativity extended to adults as well. Look at this graffiti. The creative adult is the child who survived. So this is the end of this article on Germany, on restoration of capitalism in Germany. I would like to know your opinion. Please leave your comments below or write them to this address, internationalleft@protonmail.com. Thank you for your attention.